Being racist in America costs all of us. It's very well understood now that no one can afford college because of Ronald Reagan. College in the United States used to be affordable, if not free, until the 1980s and Ronald Reagan. And they realized that a ton of Black Americans were starting to go to secondary universities. So they made the cost of going to college astronomical, unaffordable, unapproachable to try to whitewash attendance. Unfortunately, for a lot of lower and middle income white people, that also meant you get caught up in the net. Now no one can afford fucking college because they tried to keep Black and brown people out. And it's happening again in 2025 in the big fucking stupid budget bill that they've come up with. They're cutting Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP benefits, and FEMA. Why? Why are they cutting all of these programs? So that they can build detention centers for ICE. So because you're racist against brown people and you don't want brown people in this country, they're going to spend billions of dollars on building detention centers, camps, prisons. They're going to use your tax money to pay to fly them out of the country, to pay customs and border agents to round them up. That shit doesn't happen for free. So they're going to cut FEMA. So the next time you see a hurricane, a tornado, a fire swoop through your town or your neighborhood and destroy everything, and you wonder where FEMA is, it's in jail. Instead of saving each other and your neighbors, you're now paying to incarcerate brown people. They're using our money for hate instead of help. And you're good with this?
Hello lovelies, welcome back to today's episode. Some white people, they started to realize that this time around racism comes with a heavy price tag, because you can't tell how this time around, when you see how each and everything has been built in American system, it is something which really shows that something was happening somewhere. That's why a lot of people are starting to discover that it's time to talk about it, because we can't keep seeing things happening and you keep quiet as if you don't see anything. Guys, let's dive into today's episode. Drop your thought.
So yesterday I posted a video giving a very basic definition in my own words of what white privilege is. And I kept it very brief and vague on purpose because I had a feeling people would start arguing in the comments, which they did. But I also thought it was super interesting how many people were commenting that I have white guilt, that I want to be Black, and that I'm dying for the attention of the Black community. First of all, yes, I have white guilt. You should too. Anyone who grows up with the knowledge that they have systematic advantages over other people just because of historical events and historical discrimination should feel a little guilty about that. Whether or not they contributed to that is a whole other thing, but you're reaping the benefits of it. People act like white guilt is something to be ashamed of, but if you use it in the right way and you use it to further reduce injustice, it's a good thing. And when people talk about systematic injustice and things like that, and they say, oh, everyone's equal, and this is happening in the comments, there's no racism anymore, everyone's equal, obviously don't understand what systematic means. And I'm going to give an anecdotal story just to really hit this on the head. I am white, and on both sides of my family, we do not have any massive generational wealth. My mom's father is the only one of my 4 grandparents who we got any sort of generational wealth inherited from. And 99% of the wealth that we inherited from my grandfather was from selling his house. My grandfather was born in 1926 in rural North Carolina, and he was a 6'3" white man with blue eyes. And other than being white, my grandfather didn't have that many privileges. He was one of like 7 children. His mom didn't even get to high school level education, and his dad never went to college. They were not privileged in most other ways that we define privilege, but he was a white male in a very, very racist country. What his whiteness allowed him to do was work his way through college. At the time, there were colleges that weren't accepting Black people, and he was accepted to college as long as he could pay for it. And he ended up getting a law degree and becoming very successful, and again, never hoarded any significant wealth, but bought a house outside of Washington, D.C. in the 50s in a neighborhood that was redlined. And actually my mom, who was born in the 60s, remembers in the 70s when the first Black family moved into their neighborhood, because it had literally been sectioned off and realtors would not sell to Black families. And my mom, who is 58 years old, went to a year of segregated school. So for all of you saying, it was so long ago, everyone has equal rights now, get over it. My mom remembers when the first Black student joined her class in the 70s in Alexandria, Virginia. In 2015, my grandfather died, and we sold his house that he bought for around $100,000 in the 50s, and we sold it for $1 million. That money was divided among his children, and my family was able to get out of a lot of debt, and it completely reset my ability to go to private versus public school, my ability to afford tutors, my ability to become the educated person that I am. And it was all really because I have a white grandfather. Let me finish. Had my grandfather been black and had all of the other skills and background that he had, he couldn't have gone to the schools that he went to. He wouldn't have been hired in the jobs that he was. And he couldn't have bought the house that he did that, 65 years later, put his family out of debt. So if anyone tries to tell you it's not that deep, it really is that deep. It goes so far back. Any small privilege that a white person has is probably, to some degree, due to their whiteness. And if you are a white person who has roots in the South, you definitely should have white guilt, and you definitely should be doing the work to understand how your privilege affects the people around you and how you can help level the playing field. Because you, almost 100%, have an ancestor who owned black people. So yes, I have white guilt. Yes, I'm aware of my status as a white woman, and I'm aware of the parts of my identity that are privileged and the parts that aren't. But saying that you have a certain type of privilege doesn't mean that you have every privilege. It just means that that aspect of your identity is favored by society. So I can talk about being a white woman, and that makes me privileged. But if I talk about being a woman, that is actually a disadvantage in a lot of ways. And everyone tried to get all particular about these specific situations where a black person might have a privilege or a woman might have a privilege over a man. Those are isolated situations you're bringing up. We're talking about large scale, mass, systematic issues. And it's a lot deeper than just, I felt racism as a white person at one point. Fine, yeah, all of us can experience what feels like discrimination based on race. But that doesn't mean that it's systematically affecting you and stopping you and your families from catching up. That's really what it is. Now, yeah, legally, black people and white people should have the same exact rights and privileges. But they're playing catch up. Because if my family, like I said, had been black, we would never have gotten out of debt in 2015. I would never have been able to afford the school that I went to and live the lifestyle that I'm living right now. And that's because of effects from over 70 years ago. So thanks for listening. And yeah, white guilt's okay.
So a lot of people ask me what changed my perspective, and I've shared this story before, but I will share it again. While in prison, I met a man by the name of Rashawn Clark. Rashawn and I came from the same town, but we had two completely different upbringings. I was a white Christian conservative, and he was a black Muslim liberal. Rashawn was sentenced to 20 years in prison at the age of 16 for one felony crime. He was the least culpable, he was the youngest, and nobody got hurt. I, on the other hand, had been to prison twice for a total of 10 years, and I have a total of 14 felonies. We were both sentenced out of the same judicial circuit, yet he got 20 years, and I was able to go to prison and go home twice before he can even get out for the first time, as a juvenile. Now, while we were in prison, Rashawn was placed on a DOT work squad in which he got to go out into the community and work. Now, typically in prison, inmates think this is a good thing. They get to go out the gate, they get to see the free world, they get to see civilian people. It essentially gives them time away from prison. It's almost like not being in prison while you're out at work. However, Rashawn saw it differently. In prison, one of the worst infractions you can get is a refusal to work. They can put you in confinement for 60 days and take all of your gain time. When Rashawn was placed on this work squad, he came back to the dorm and he told me, "I'm going to confinement." I was like, "What do you mean you're going to confinement? You got placed on a great job. You get to go out the gate. You get to be away from prison. Like, why would you go to confinement? Why would you refuse to work?" And he proceeded to tell me it goes against everything I stand for. He said it's slave labor. He went on to tell me about the 13th Amendment, the abolishment of slavery except when punishable by a crime. Rashawn told me that prison work squads have become modern day slavery. He went on to tell me that police target poor black communities, put them in jail, and make them work for free. Then I researched and learned so much more. During the Jim Crow era, black people were relegated to second-class citizenship, disenfranchised from voting, barriers to housing, barriers to employment, barriers to education. 1964, we passed the Civil Rights Act. 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act, essentially making it illegal to discriminate based on race. Well, in 2023, the only people that you can still legally discriminate against are convicted felons. You can relegate to second-class citizenship. You can create barriers to housing, barriers to voting, barriers to education, and barriers to employment. Now, do you think it's coincidence that in 2023, 1 in 3 black males carry the convicted felon label as opposed to 1 in 17 white males? And since the end of the Jim Crow era to 2023, we've had a 700% increase in our prison population. We militarized our police, we decreased school funding, creating the school to prison pipeline. We created a war on drugs. And by seeing this, I saw that our criminal justice system is the epicenter of systemic racism in America.
The history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. It starts in the colonies of what would become the United States. Let's remember, during the colonial period, mid-1600s, there was no such thing as white people. I know some people who are now called white find that shocking, right? Because they think whiteness is real, right? But whiteness was created. Europeans didn't call themselves white. We didn't call ourselves white. We weren't all members of one big happy family. Are you kidding? Have you studied the history of Europe? The history of Europe was about killing each other. That's what we did in Europe. We just killed each other before we figured out there were other people to kill. We just killed each other, right? I mean, that was the history of Europe. The English hated the Irish, right? Northern Italians didn't even think that Southern Italians were Italians. The Germans hated everybody, and everybody hated their ass right back, right? There was no team called white, no race called white, but all of a sudden, in the middle of the 1600s, there was. Why? Why was it suddenly necessary to create this thing called the white race? Well, because rich people can count, that's why. And so rich folks looked around, the ones that owned all the land, you know, in the colonies, the colonial elite, looked around and they realized something, that they were heavily outnumbered by African enslaved folks, by European indentured servants, who were just one level above a slave, or other Europeans who weren't technically indentured servants, but they were still peasants, didn't have any money, didn't have any land, and they could do the math. They added it up, and they were like, damn, we got to figure out a way to split these folks apart from one another, or they're going to rise up and take our stuff, right? Because after a while, these black folks who were enslaved Africans and these quote-unquote white folks who were poor Europeans are going to figure out they're all getting played by these rich people. Right? So ultimately, the rich figure out they got to come up with some way to get somebody in that group on their team. The easiest thing is to get the poor Europeans, right? Because at least they look like you. They sort of share some of the customs and the culture. So they all of a sudden create this thing called whiteness, and they say, now you're part of the club. Now we're going to let you testify in court, enter into contracts, vote, at least if you're a man, own a little bit of land, at least if you're a man, right? And we're going to get rid of indentured servitude. No more of that, because you're too good for that. And we're going to take the white men, now called white men, and put them on the slave patrol to keep black people in line. Give them a horse and a gun and a badge and make them feel big and powerful, right? They're still poor. They still don't have anything. They didn't pay the slave patrol well, right? Just exploited them, used them as a buffer between the elite and the other poor folks, particularly poor folks of color. And pretty soon, the rebellions that occasionally happened where black and white got together to overthrow the elite, those stopped. Because the divide and conquer had begun to work, right? You could turn people against each other by telling those poor white folks, they got to keep these black people in line. And so that divide and conquer gets initiated in the colonies. Rich white men telling not rich white people that their enemies are black and brown. Fast forward to the Civil War era. And you have, I'm from the South, right? My people, the elite in my part of the country, right, actually announced that the reason they wanted to break away from the Union and possibly go to war with their brothers and sisters to the north was in order to maintain slavery and white supremacy. They said that at the time. We lie about it now. And we say it had nothing to do with that. But of course, at the time, they didn't have any shame about it, so they just said it openly. Right? The vice president of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, said that the cornerstone of the new government was the great truth that the Negro was not the equal of the white man. So that's the reason the Confederacy was formed and existed. But here's the trick. If I'm rich and I want to go to war to protect my ownership in other human beings, my property, but you're poor and you don't own any enslaved people, why the hell would you go fight to protect my stuff? Because I'm a rich person. I'm not going to fight. Rich people don't go to war, right? Rich people get poor people to go to war for them, whether it's in 1860 or whether it's during the 1960s or whether it's today, right? Rich folks get doctors to write notes for them that say that they have heel spurs, and that's why they can't go to Vietnam. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, you can Google that shit because he's sitting in the White House right now, right? Oh, I can't go fight. I have heel spurs. Send some poor kids to do that for me, please, right? So that's been a long-standing tradition. So the rich have to figure out a way to convince the poor to go fight for them. But that's a hard thing. That's like a hard sell, right? Like, how the hell, why would you do that? Why would you go fight to protect my property rights when you don't own anything? The only way you would do it is if that rich person comes to you and says, hey, listen, you gotta go fight because we gotta maintain our way of life, because if these people get free, they're gonna take your jobs. No, fool, they already got your job. That's how it works, right? Because if I'm white and I gotta charge you $1 a day to work on the farm, but you can get a black person to do it for nothing because you own them, guess who got the job? Free got the job, right? So in a sense, poor white folks would have been better off joining with black folks to overthrow the slave system that would have raised the wage floor of all working people. But they got tricked by rich white men telling them that their enemies were black and brown. Fast forward to the 1930s. And you have white labor leaders. They're not even the elite, right? The labor leaders are not the elite, but they're the elite within the labor movement. And even they had fallen for it at this point. So they didn't want to integrate their unions. And they would say things like, well, we can't have black people and Mexicans and Chinese folks in our unions because if we do that, it's going to reduce the professionalism of our craft. We have to maintain the integrity of our profession. No, fool, you need more people in the damn union is what you need. And if you don't let those folks in, guess what happens when you go out on strike? Who is the boss going to use to replace you? They're going to replace you with the very same black and brown folks that you didn't want to work next to, right? And so at the end of and then you're going to blame them for taking your job rather than the white rich dude for giving it to them, right? Divide and conquer, telling not rich white folks that their enemies are black and brown. And now we fast forward to the president. We got the president of the United States becoming president on the basis of that same rhetoric, telling not rich white folks that the reason they don't have a job is because Mexicans took them.
When white people see my posts about racism in America, frequently they say, I didn't know. When black people see these comments, they say, we already know. There is no way you didn't know. Don't pretend you didn't. This disconnect is really hard to explain, and I've been trying to understand it myself. I'm going to be digging into this really deep because I think it's so important. It's not that we're just oblivious white people. It's that we've been groomed to be oblivious white people. People point out that it's not like this stuff is locked in some vault somewhere. It's available. You can see it. And that's true. But we were trained not to ask questions. We were trained not to look for it. And I see it in my family. I see it in my circle of friends, even some of my friends that are pretty progressive. We have this ingrained training to not ask too many questions. We were taught to trust authority figures, teachers, ministers, police officers, politicians, the anchor guy on the evening news. We believed them because we were groomed from childhood to believe that they were trustworthy. We were not taught that the system itself, the system they were part of, was designed to protect itself first. And frankly, it felt good just to trust them. It's like you had this permanent mommy and daddy figure. It made life feel safe. The gaps in white knowledge were filled in with lies. We were told that poor people were lazy, that's why they're poor. That crime existed in black neighborhoods because they were black neighborhoods. That broken families cause poverty. These ideas were not questioned. They were treated as common sense. And we were started with our grooming as infants, as little tiny babies, as little bitty kids that are impressionable and just forming our ideas about the world. So that was our social foundation. We were told that black people can't keep their marriages together. I was even told that the reason they couldn't keep their marriages together was because of how they were treated during slavery. So out of one side of their mouth, they'd say, wasn't that horrible that families were split up during slavery? But now that has just become part of who they are. And so it's their fault. I don't know, it didn't make sense to me either. We also were not told that welfare benefits were not available if there was a man in the house, a black woman working 2 jobs who still needed support to raise her children. could not have a husband or partner living in the house with her. And of course, we were taught that that was their fault because they couldn't keep their marriages together. As we were growing up and we started to repeat these beliefs, we were seen as respectful and well-adjusted. I don't know, are you getting pissed off? I'm getting pissed off just going through this again. We were guided by the TV news and movies and TV shows to care when white people suffered and to disconnect from the pain of other people. We were taught to feel patriotic about our country without questioning whether they were being truthful with us about why we should feel such patriotism. When we asked those white authority figures that we were taught to trust, we were lied to. Now, when black people give us honest answers, we don't fully trust them. It's not about ignorance, it's about conditioning. My education is in behavior analysis, and that's how that works. You just expose someone to a social system that supports a certain line of thinking, and you fall for it, especially if you are started out as a young kid being taught all that stuff. And that's what happens to all of us. We were taught that silence is polite and that truth about society is rude or inappropriate. And as a girl that went to a fundamentalist Christian church, that was even more so. You don't ask questions that are going to make people uncomfortable. But that comfort, you see, it kept us obedient. It kept us from asking too many questions. It kept us from wanting to do anything about it because we didn't fully understand that there was something that needed to be done. We were used to preserve a system that depended on our own silence. It kept us from befriending black people. It kept us from knowing what the hell we thought we knew about those people. So when white people say, I didn't know about any of this, understand what that really means. We were trained not to look. We were trained to believe the stories that we were told by the authority figures. We were shaped by a system that used your trust against you. We were trained to look away. And now we have a choice. White people, we need to get angry about being kept in the dark all these years so that together with our black neighbors and neighbors of all races, we can break down this oppressive system that has brought us here to the point of fascism. Check the caption for some documentaries to help you get started learning. We need to really get curious.
I'm telling the truth. There's no systemic racism that I've experienced here in America. What system is racist?
Whew. We gotta dive in because, man, I have an example. My name's Dr. Joel, the Medical Mythbuster, and today let's talk about systemic racism in medicine. To do that, I want to use the example of one specific device called a spirometer. Spirometry is a test that doctors use to measure how healthy your lungs are. It's used for conditions like asthma and COPD. But for decades, if you were Black or Asian, your test results were automatically adjusted downwards, making it harder to be diagnosed with different conditions. But to understand how that device plays into systemic racism, we have to rewind through history. Starting in 1795. It was then that Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, wrote in notes on the state of Virginia without evidence that enslaved Africans had weaker lungs than white people. And John Hutchinson, who created the spirometer. He made it as a useful medical tool for measuring lung disease and military fitness. In the United States, a Louisiana doctor named Samuel Cartwright took that tool and used it on enslaved people. He claimed that the spirometer proved that Thomas Jefferson was right, that Black people had lower lung capacity. He even argued that slavery was good for them because forced labor supposedly revitalized their lungs. But here's where the systemic part comes into play. Instead of rejecting the myth, medicine absorbed it. By the 20th century, spirometers came with something called a race correction. If you were Black, your lung results were automatically lowered by 10 to 15%, and if you were Asian, by 4 to 6%. In fact, up until 2021, up to date, the world's most utilized medical reference by doctors still said that Black patients had lower lung function as if it were a biological fact. That race correction meant that what was labeled abnormal for a white patient could be labeled normal for a Black or Asian patient. That led to misdiagnoses, delayed treatments, denied disability claims, and less lung transplants. And the worst part, Most doctors didn't even realize that race was adjusting values because it was built directly into the machine. It wasn't until 2022 that the Global Lung Function Initiative released Race Neutral. 2023, the American Thoracic Society recommended a race-neutral approach to reading the pulmonary function tests. Some places are only now just phasing them out. That's what systemic racism is. It's not just one patient being dismissed by the healthcare system. It's racist ideas from 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson's words, Samuel Cartwright's pseudoscience, being built into a machine and shaping healthcare for generations.
When you start to see how some people will feel not people to talk about this word, the racism, and yet inside them they know they are racist, they can't even let it go just like that. It is something really funny to see how you don't want anyone to talk about some issue which has been happening decades, generation from generation to generation, and yet you are still there practicing on other people and you don't want anyone to talk about it. When you try to observe each and everything, especially on this American system, how each and everything was built, it is something really alarming. You can't tell how, even till date, a lot of people are still complaining, especially Black people. When you see this small minority keep complaining, you see, we are being treated inequally. What you are doing to us is not something good. You need to stop each and everything. How come? On the other side, you would hear some people saying, why these people, they always brag about racism? Why these people, they can't list? Why they always bring some issues when there is no any issues? If you are saying that there is no issues, when you go there, even in back days, try to understand, try to see how these Black people has been denied a lot of opportunities. They have been taken away all their rights here and there. Even when you try to check in education, they put a lot of rules and laws which we make a lot of Black people, a lot of black young generation not finishing their school, not going to school. Even on this new administration, you have heard the way they try to dismantle education system because they don't want a lot of people to get that education, because the more you keep people educated, the more they will discover, they will know what you've been hiding from them. If this time you just come out from where you say, I'm closing job corps because majority of people who went there are young teenager Black people. I don't want them to keep going there because they are acquiring a lot of knowledge, wisdom from there. It's no longer something we need to put in practice. And yet, the system has been there for so long helping these people. And you are saying you are not doing anything against them. When you just come out just there saying, I'm removing student loan, I don't want to do anything, government is no longer going to put any money on this system, what are you trying to say? And you are saying, when Black people come out to say something like this, they are just making excuse? I don't understand. When you are saying people are making excuse, each and everyone will come out to make this same excuse. Each and everyone will come out to say what you are saying is something you are cooking. No. When you try to see how these white people, they are trying to come out to express their feelings, the way they know each and everything, how each and everything they grew up, observe especially in their community, in their families, things happening, discrimination against this small minority. It is something you can't come out and say these people, they are lying. If someone is testifying the way she managed to finish her education here and there because they guaranteed them that the school loan in a way simple than Black people, and they managed to finish all those loans. They facilitate them in a very smooth way to finish those loans, and you are just there saying, no, why are you talking about something like this? When you try to observe very well and you understand very well how these white people, the way they talk about these things, especially from them, that's how you feel it, what Black people has been saying, and they keep saying. When you see this gentleman, he came out to say that, I've been in a prison with a Black teenager. He only had one felony. Me, I have almost 4 felonies, but I've been managed to go out of prison twice. And this young teenager has never been out of prison. Instead, they sentenced him 20 years in a prison over something which is really simple, because the skin of his color. I even got shocked how come these people, they will try their best ever to put a lot of young Black generation in a prison to do their labor work in a prison. in a way of saying that's how they are. And when people will come out to say that slavery is still there, but is in a hidden, in a modern way, some people will come out to say, no, no, you always there arguing, you always there bring these things. We are tired. Let's past be the past. There is no any way people will stop talking about this when it is something which is still happening. There is no any way black people are going to stop talking about their issue when they still have the same issues right now. You are just there sitting in your house comfortably. You have your white privilege. You have your support from white supremacy. You are having everything you want. You are going to shop anyhow you want freely. You don't have that doubt that someone is going to come after you checking what you are shopping. When black people talking about their issues, the way they will go somewhere feeling that is scary, they may get shot maybe in a white neighborhood. You are just there walking freely, and you don't want anyone to talk about any issue. Are you for real? When you see this time around, when we talk about how racism has caused a lot about America and American citizens till date, it is something each and everyone would see and conclude about it. When you see this new administration, what they are doing, all those policies they brought in place just to go against black people. When we try to see, check in Chicago, you have seen how ICE raid has started to when they are in their home. They break their home 1 a.m. They call them out in that code. They don't care. And they know that they are black Americans. What are you saying? When we are talking about it, the way black people has been harassed, has been treated in a bad way till date, this is something which is still happening. Why this ICE would target in this black community in this Chicago? What are they going to do? When you are going in someone's house as if he's a crime, you break his home at 1 a.m. What do you mean? What is the law which will allow you to do such things to a human being? Why you have never seen something happening like this in a white neighborhood? When black people come out to say their issues, it's a problem. When they are talking enough is enough, everyone will say, no, 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 we are tired of you, we are tired of you. What are you saying? You just there sitting there, always look on us, blaming on us, on each and everything. But when proof are there, you don't want even anyone to talk about it. When we've been saying these things of racism, it's something people need to work on. If you think that is something you can't manage to take out of your heart, you need at least to approach some people who manage to do it. When you were saying the way you grew up, seeing people being racist to black people, treating them in those unhuman way, you need to come out and start to educate them more, because as you right now, you are starting to see what you've been doing is something which was not good on this race. But when you see they're saying there is no any way we'll keep talking about these things, there is no any way we'll keep hearing this noise from black people, there is no any way black people are going to keep quiet on something which is still happening on their communities, on their kids. There is no any way you are going to see your teenager being accused of something he has never done, and you just keep quiet because you don't want anyone to talk about it. When someone go in your store to buy, you are telling them we don't sell black people in this store, and you don't want them to talk about it. Does it even make any sense? Guys, let me know what you think about this episode, because after I came across this particular video, I thought that it is something people need to keep talk about it. It's something people need to understand, because there is no any way people will keep sitting there saying the past, let's be the past. Enough, just enough. Guys, drop your thought in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Do you think racism is still a big business in America? Do you think people are just exaggerating? Do you think there is a way these things are going to stop? Drop your thought in the comment section. Thank you for watching. See you in my next episode.